It was a name that echoed with grandeur and promise. The RMS Titanic was more than just a vessel, it was a floating palace, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition at the dawn of a new century. Heralded as the pinnacle of naval engineering, she was the largest ship ever built, a marvel of steel and rivets designed to conquer the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Her creators and her owners, the White Star Line, bestowed upon her a title that would become infamous, unsinkable. This was not merely a marketing slogan, it was a deeply held belief, a declaration of faith in the power of technology to triumph over the unforgiving forces of nature. The world watched in awe as this behemoth prepared for its maiden journey. On April 10th, 1912, a sense of electric excitement filled the air at Southampton's port. The Titanic, gleaming under the spring sun, was a symbol of a confident and prosperous era. Thousands gathered to witness the beginning of her voyage, a journey destined for the bustling metropolis of New York City. On her decks, a microcosm of society assembled, from some of the wealthiest and most influential figures of the age to hopeful immigrants seeking a new life in the land of opportunity. They were all united by a shared sense of adventure and the prestige of traveling aboard the most luxurious ship in the world. As she pulled away from the shore, passengers waved from the railings, their faces filled with optimism, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them in the icy waters ahead. The ship was a floating city of opulence. Its interiors were meticulously crafted to rival the finest hotels in Europe, boasting grand staircases, lavish dining halls, a swimming pool, and Turkish baths. For the first-class passengers, the voyage was an extravagant social event, a week of fine dining, music, and conversation. But even for those in second and third class, the standards of comfort and sanitation were far beyond anything they had experienced before. The Titanic was a statement of progress, a bold declaration that humanity had entered a new epoch of dominance over the natural world. It represented the dreams of an entire generation, a generation that believed in endless possibilities and the unwavering march of technological advancement. But beneath the surface of this magnificent spectacle, the ocean held its own ancient and powerful secrets. The North Atlantic in April is a treacherous realm, a domain of freezing temperatures and colossal icebergs that drift silently south from the Arctic. The ship, a beacon of light and warmth, was sailing directly into this cold, dark wilderness. The confidence placed in its design, the belief in its invincibility, created a sense of security that was as vast as the ocean itself. Yet this very confidence would soon be shattered, replaced by a horror that would haunt the collective memory for over a century. The dream was about to transform into a chilling nightmare from which there would be no escape. The end came with a sudden, violent shudder in the dead of night. On April 14th at 11:40 p.m., the colossal vessel met its match. An iceberg, a silent mountain of ancient ice, tore a fatal wound along the ship's starboard side. The collision, which many passengers barely noticed at first, had sealed the Titanic's doom. The unsinkable ship, the floating palace of dreams, had sustained damage so catastrophic that its builders had never conceived it possible. Within moments, the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic began to pour into the vessel's forward compartments. The magnificent ship, which had set sail with such pomp and promise just 4 days earlier, now had less than 3 hours left to live, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. What followed was a descent into chaos and disbelief. The initial calm gave way to a growing sense of panic as the ship's forward tilt became impossible to ignore. Crew members scrambled to assess the damage while distress signals were fired into the empty, star-filled sky. Lifeboats, meant to be a last resort, were lowered into the water, many of them shockingly half-empty. The stark reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. There were not enough lifeboats for the 2,224 souls on board. A tragedy of unimaginable proportions was unfolding 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland in the most isolated part of the ocean. The promises of safety and security vanished into the freezing air, replaced by desperate choices and heartbreaking goodbyes. By 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, the great ship was gone. It vanished beneath the waves, taking with it more than 1,500 men, women, and children. Only 706 people would be rescued from the lifeboats hours later by the RMS Carpathia. The rest were lost to the freezing abyss, their stories silenced forever. The world awoke to headlines that seemed impossible, a maritime disaster on a scale that defied belief. The sinking of the Titanic was not just a tragedy, it was a profound shock to the system, a brutal lesson in the fallibility of human pride and the awesome power of the natural world. The name that once symbolized progress now became a byword for disaster. Yet as the initial shock subsided and the stories of survivors emerged, troubling questions began to surface. The official narrative of a tragic accident, a case of terrible misfortune, seemed too simple for some. Whispers turned into theories, and doubts began to cast a long shadow over the accepted history of that fateful night. Why was the ship traveling at such a high speed through a known ice field, despite receiving multiple warnings? Why were the lookouts in the crow's nest not equipped with binoculars? And perhaps most disturbingly, why did other ships in the vicinity seemingly ignore the Titanic's desperate pleas for help? The sinking was a maritime tragedy. Of that, there was no doubt, but was it something more? Was it simply bad luck, or was there a darker, more deliberate hand at play? The story of the RMS Titanic did not begin on the waves, but in the fiery heart of Belfast's shipyards. She was not merely another ship in a long line of ocean liners, she was conceived as a statement of dominance. Built by the master craftsmen of Harland and Wolff for the prestigious White Star Line, Titanic was the second of 3 Olympic-class vessels designed to outshine all rivals. Her sheer scale was breathtaking, stretching 882 feet in length and rising over 10 stories high. She was a titan of industry, a moving monument forged from more than 3 million rivets, holding together plates of solid steel. This was more than a vessel. It was a bold declaration of British maritime supremacy, a machine built to tame the wild Atlantic. The mission was clear: to capture the lucrative and highly competitive transatlantic passenger trade. The White Star Line, locked in a fierce battle with its main competitor Cunard, decided to focus not on speed but on unparalleled size and luxury. The Titanic and her sisters, Olympic and Britannic, were to be the most magnificent ships afloat. The world watched the construction with fascination, a process that took over 2 years and the labor of thousands of men. Blueprints detailed every intricate feature, from the massive engines that powered her to the elegant design of her first-class suites. Every element was engineered for greatness, contributing to the growing legend that this ship was not just advanced, but fundamentally different. A ship that could not be sunk. This belief in her invincibility was rooted in her innovative design. The Titanic's hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments, a revolutionary safety feature. The ship could supposedly stay afloat, even if 4 of these compartments were breached. This engineering marvel led the press and the public to label her practically unsinkable. The phrase stuck, becoming a powerful part of her mythos even before she touched the water. It fostered a sense of absolute security, an unwavering faith in the power of modern technology. The ship was a symbol of an age that believed it had conquered the limitations of the past, an era of bold ambition and unshakable confidence in its own creations. As her launch date approached, the legend of the Titanic grew to epic proportions. She was more than just a means of transport. She was a destination in herself, a masterpiece of human achievement. The White Star Line promoted her as the epitome of safety, comfort and elegance, attracting the attention of the world's wealthiest and most influential people. Her construction was a spectacle, her purpose was grand, and her reputation was flawless. The stage was set for a maiden voyage that was expected to be a triumphant procession, a celebration of a new age of travel. No one could have predicted that this legend, born in fire and steel, was destined for a cold, dark grave in the depths of the ocean. When the Titanic finally opened her doors to the public, she revealed a world of luxury that had never been seen on the high seas. The interiors were designed to be a floating palace, a seamless blend of different historical styles crafted to impress her elite clientele. The grand staircase, descending through 7 decks under a magnificent glass dome, was the ship's crowning glory. Carved from polished oak and adorned with intricate bronze cherubs, it was the social heart of the vessel. First-class passengers could stroll through a Parisian-style cafe, relax in a Georgian-era reading room, or exercise in a state-of-the-art gymnasium. The ship even featured a heated saltwater swimming pool and opulent Turkish baths, amenities that were unheard of for their time. The commitment to luxury extended to every detail. The first-class suites were lavishly decorated, some featuring private promenade decks and separate servant quarters. The à la carte restaurant, managed by a famous London restaurateur, offered the finest cuisine, rivaling the best establishments in Europe. For these passengers, the voyage was not simply a journey. It was an exclusive social event, a week-long immersion in unparalleled comfort and extravagance. The Titanic was built to cater to the whims of the super-rich, a playground for the Gilded Age elite. It was a world of fine wines, elegant dinners and polite conversation, all unfolding against the backdrop of the vast and silent Atlantic Ocean. This was the dream the White Star Line was selling, but the ship was a microcosm of the rigid class structure of the Edwardian era. While first-class passengers enjoyed unimaginable splendor, the accommodations in second and third class were a world apart. Even so, for those traveling in steerage, the Titanic offered a level of comfort that was a significant improvement over other ships. Third-class cabins were clean and well-maintained, and the dining rooms served simple but wholesome food. For the hundreds of immigrants packed into these lower decks, the ship represented a bridge to a new life, a passage from poverty and uncertainty to the promise of America. They were as much a part of the Titanic story as the millionaires on the decks above. On April 10, 1912, as the ship prepared to leave Southampton, this floating world came to life. The decks buzzed with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Passengers waved farewell to the crowds on the shore, their voices mingling with the powerful blast of the ship's whistle. As the Titanic pulled away, her immense size and pristine white and black hull cutting through the water, she was the very picture of power and grace. On board, a diverse cast of characters, from aristocrats and industrialists to hopeful families and lone travelers, settled in for the journey. Each person carried their own stories, ambitions and secrets, all bound together on this single magnificent vessel sailing towards a shared destiny. The Titanic's passenger list read like a who's who of the early 20th century. Aboard were some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals of the era, their collective fortunes amounting to billions in today's money. John Jacob Astor IV, an American real estate magnate and one of the richest men in the world, was returning from his honeymoon with his young, pregnant wife. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a vast mining fortune, was traveling with his valet and his mistress. Isidor Straus, the co-owner of Macy's department store, was journeying with his devoted wife Ida. These were the titans of industry and society, figures whose every move was chronicled by the press, and their presence added to the ship's aura of prestige. Their stories, however, were not the only ones unfolding on the ship. The Titanic carried a diverse collection of individuals, each with their own purpose. There were artists returning from Europe, military officers, writers, and professional athletes. In second class, there were teachers, engineers, and clergymen, a comfortable middle class enjoying a standard of travel that was still a luxury for many. And deep within the ship, in the crowded quarters of third class, were over 700 immigrants. They came from Ireland, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and the Levant, families who had sold everything they owned for a one-way ticket to a new beginning. Their hopes and dreams were perhaps the most precious cargo on board. But among the passengers and crew, there were also secrets. Behind the veneer of Edwardian propriety lay hidden dramas and unspoken tensions. Francis Millet, a renowned painter and writer, was traveling back to America for a meeting at the behest of President Taft, carrying with him unknown plans and documents. Whispers circulated about the immense wealth being transported in the ship's hold, including rumors of a priceless jeweled copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The ship's own captain, Edward J. Smith, a veteran commodore of the White Star Line, was on his final voyage before a planned retirement. He was under pressure to make this maiden journey a spectacular success, perhaps even to set a new speed record. This complex floating society was a perfect reflection of its time, an era of great wealth and stark inequality, of technological confidence bordering on arrogance, and of deep-seated traditions clashing with the forces of change. For 4 days this world sailed on in blissful ignorance, a bubble of luxury and hope gliding across the calm, cold ocean. The passengers socialized, dined, and dreamed of their arrival in New York, completely unaware that their vessel was on a collision course with fate. The secrets they carried, both personal and professional, were destined to be buried with them, adding another layer of mystery to the tragedy that was about to unfold in the dark. Guam. April 14th, 1912. The Titanic glides through a deceptively calm, moonless night, its lookouts, Fleet and Lee, straining to see without binoculars. Suddenly, at 11:40 p.m., Fleet spots a dark shape ahead. "Iceberg, right ahead!" The warning bell rings. On the bridge, frantic orders, reverse engines, hard to port. The ship turns, but not fast enough. The iceberg scrapes along the starboard side. Most passengers feel only a faint shudder, unaware of the mortal wound below. 5 watertight compartments are breached. Water floods in at a terrifying rate. Designer Thomas Andrews inspects the damage and delivers the verdict. Titanic is doomed. 2 hours at most remain. The unsinkable ship's fate is sealed in silence and darkness. Orders go out, lifeboats uncovered, passengers mustered. But disbelief reigns. Many think it's a drill. Lifeboats launch half-empty, confusion and lack of drills wasting precious time. Class divisions and locked gates trap third-class passengers below, while families are torn apart on deck. The orchestra plays on, their music a surreal comfort as fear grows. Below, chaos and desperation mount as water rises. The ship's tilt becomes undeniable. Panic replaces calm. For many, the promise of a new life dissolves into tragedy. Lifeboats become scenes of heartbreak. Too few seats, too many left behind. Distress rockets light the sky, but distant ships do not come. Discipline breaks. Officers fire warning shots to control the crowd. Stories of sacrifice emerge. Ida Strauss refusing to leave her husband, others clinging to hope. Survivors in lifeboats watch helplessly as Titanic sinks, haunted by the cries of those left in the water. Collapsible boats are swamped. Men cling to overturned hulls, fighting the cold and exhaustion. Survival is a bitter victory, shadowed by loss and the sounds of the dying. Titanic's bow disappears, the stern rises, decks turning vertical, lights flicker out, a thunderous roar, metal tearing, the ship breaking in two. The stern stands briefly, then plunges into the abyss. 2:20 a.m., Titanic vanishes, only debris and desperate swimmers remain. The sea fills with cries for help, but most lifeboats hold back, fearing they'll be swamped. Only one boat returns too late. The freezing water claims nearly all. Silence falls. The disaster is complete. The official story: an iceberg sank Titanic. But why was she racing through known ice fields at full speed? Multiple warnings were ignored. The ship pressed on at 22 knots, risking everything for a record-breaking arrival. Was it pressure from White Star Line's Ismay? Overconfidence in Titanic's design? Standard practice was to slow down in ice, but the officers gambled and lost. The high speed made the collision fatal. A slower pace might have saved her. This was not fate, but a human error. A reckless decision that turned danger into disaster. The tragedy was not just an accident, but a profound failure of command. High above the deck, in the exposed crow's nest, the lives of everyone on board rested in the eyes of 2 men, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. Their sole duty was to scan the dark horizon for any sign of danger. Yet they were performing this critical task with a significant handicap. The binoculars designated for the lookouts were missing. They were locked inside a storage locker on the ship, and the key had been inadvertently left behind in Southampton with an officer who was transferred off the crew at the last minute. This seemingly small oversight had immense consequences. Without the aid of binoculars, the lookout's ability to spot a dark object like an iceberg on a moonless night was severely compromised, reducing their effective range of sight dramatically. The absence of these crucial tools was not a secret. The lookouts had complained about the situation during the voyage, but their requests went unheeded. They were forced to rely on their unaided vision to protect the fastest moving object on the seas. When Frederick Fleet finally spotted the iceberg, it was a dark mass that appeared suddenly out of the haze. With binoculars, he might have seen it minutes earlier, providing the bridge with enough warning to steer the colossal ship clear of danger. In the subsequent inquiries, Fleet testified that with binoculars he could have seen the iceberg in time to avoid it. This what-if hangs over the entire tragedy, a simple piece of equipment that could have rewritten history. Why was this issue not addressed with the seriousness it deserved? In the hierarchy of a grand liner like the Titanic, the concerns of a lookout might have seemed trivial to senior officers preoccupied with the smooth running of the floating palace. Perhaps it was another symptom of the pervasive overconfidence that plagued the voyage. The belief in the ship's invincibility may have led to a casual dismissal of such a basic safety requirement. The officers might have felt that the ship's structural integrity was a more reliable defense than the keen eyes of a lookout. This lapse in procedure points to a systemic failure, a culture where essential safety protocols were overlooked in favor of routine and assumption. This single missing key becomes a powerful symbol of the chain of errors that led to the sinking. It represents a failure of process, a breakdown in the simple, practical measures that are the bedrock of safety at sea. The official narrative focuses on the iceberg, the so-called act of God, but the story of the missing binoculars introduces an element of human error that is far more unsettling. It suggests that the disaster was not inevitable. It was contingent on a series of small, preventable mistakes. The men in the crow's nest were set up to fail, left to guard a billion-dollar vessel, and over 2,000 lives with nothing but their own eyesight against the vast, deceptive darkness of the North Atlantic. Perhaps the most haunting and debated question from that night revolves around a ship that saw the Titanic's distress signals but did nothing. Just 10 to 19 miles away, the SS Californian was stopped for the night, surrounded by the same ice field that would prove fatal for the Titanic. The ship's radio operator, having warned other vessels of the ice, had shut down his wireless for the night just minutes before the Titanic began transmitting its frantic SOS calls. However, the crew on the Californian's deck saw the flares that the Titanic fired into the sky. They witnessed 8 white rockets exploding in the distance, the universal signal of a ship in distress. They even tried to signal the mystery ship with a Morse lamp, but received no coherent reply. Despite these clear signs of trouble, the captain of the Californian, Stanley Lord, took no decisive action. He was informed of the rockets by his officers, but concluded they were likely just company signals being exchanged between ships of the same line, even though white flares were not used for that purpose. He went back to sleep, and the Californian remained stationary until morning. By the time they learned of the disaster and steamed towards the Titanic's last known position, it was far too late. The rescue ship Carpathia had already picked up all the survivors. The Californian, the ship that was closest and could have potentially saved hundreds more lives, had remained a silent, passive observer to the entire tragedy. Captain Lord's inaction has been the subject of intense controversy for more than a century. At both the American and British inquiries, he and his crew gave conflicting and confusing testimonies. Lord maintained that the ship they saw was not the Titanic, but a smaller vessel, and that it was much farther away than estimated. However, other officers on his ship believed it was a large passenger liner and that it was close enough to warrant investigation. The failure to wake the radio operator when the rockets were spotted is particularly damning. A single command could have re-established communication and revealed the horrifying truth unfolding just over the horizon. The Californian could have reached the Titanic before it sank, or at the very least arrived in time to pull many more people from the freezing water. The story of the Californian adds a layer of profound human failure to the narrative of the sinking. While the Titanic's crew fought for their lives, their potential saviors were just miles away, shrouded in a fog of indecision and indifference. Was it a colossal blunder in judgment, a case of gross negligence, or something more? Some have speculated that Lord was afraid to navigate his own ship through the dangerous icefield in the dark. Whatever the reason, the image of this silent neighbor, a beacon of hope that never moved, is one of the most tragic elements of the Titanic story. It raises a deeply uncomfortable question. How many of the 1,500 who perished could have been saved if one man had simply made a different choice? The official story of the Titanic is one of tragic accident and human error, but a far more elaborate and sinister theory has persisted for decades. One that suggests the ship that sank to the bottom of the Atlantic was not the Titanic at all. According to this theory, the vessel that lies wrecked on the ocean floor is actually her almost identical sister ship, the RMS Olympic. The Titanic and the Olympic were the first two of the White Star Line's new class of superliners, built side by side in the Harland and Wolff shipyard. To the untrained eye, they were virtually indistinguishable, sharing the same grand design, size and profile. This striking similarity is the cornerstone of a plot that some believe is the greatest insurance fraud in history. The Olympic had her own troubled history. In September 1911, just a few months into her service, she was involved in a serious collision with a Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawke. The warship struck the Olympic's starboard quarter, causing massive damage to her hull and propellers. The Olympic limped back to Belfast for extensive repairs, an incident that proved to be a financial disaster for the White Star Line. A Royal Navy inquiry blamed the Olympic for the collision, meaning the company's insurance claim was denied. The ship was taken out of service, losing revenue every day while the cost of repairs mounted. The White Star Line was facing a huge, uninsured loss with a damaged and now infamous asset. It is at this point